A whole lot better. Do we have anybody to add to the prayer list this morning? No special add-ons? That's a good thing. I don't see Cherry, so if you would add Cherry. And if we can get Karen to join us. Morning, Karen. Go ahead.
Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for this beautiful morning. Thank you, Lord, for this time we get to spend together with you and studying your word. Pray, Lord, that you bless our efforts to listen and participate. Pray that you be with Larry, help him to deliver what he's prepared and capture. And Lord, we pray for Sherry. Don't know where she is, but she's doing well. Rest with everyone else on our prayers that we pray for. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Thank you. No, that ain't going to work. Okay. We didn't finish up 14 last week, but we did find a good stopping point. So we're going to pick up at verse 25. But before we do, I want to read 24. We're in chapter 14 of Isaiah. I want to read verse 24. It just came out and just struck me, and I think it's one worth memorizing. The Lord of hosts has sworn, saying, surely, just as I have intended, so it has happened, and just as I have planned, so it will stand. Too bad the Jews didn't remember that, and let's hope that we never forget that. So. All right, let's get into 25, to the last of this chapter. This last section really separates itself from 13 and 14. It does seem kind of strange when we read it, we get into it, but it still paints a really important picture. So I'm going to read 25 through the end of the chapter, and then we'll go back and we'll break it apart. To break Assyria in my land, and I will trample him on my mountains. Then his yoke will be removed from them, and his burden removed from their shoulder. This is the plan devised against the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out against all nations. For the Lord of hosts has planned, and who can frustrate it? And as for his stretched out hand, who can turn it back? In that year King Ahaz died, this oracle came. Do not rejoice, O Philistia, all of you, because the rod that struck you is broken. For from the serpent's root a viper will come out, and its fruit will be a flying serpent. And those who are most helpless will eat, and the needy will lie down in security. I will destroy your root with famine, and it will kill off your survivors. Wail, O gate, cry, O city, melt away, O Philistia, all of you, for smoke comes from the north, and there is no straggler in his ranks. How then will one answer the messenger of the nation? That the Lord has founded Zion, and the afflicted of his people will seek refuge in it. Okay. So, now, according to this, I read my picture first. All right. This is from Clark's commentary. And again, I've told you that I like his historical documentation. Clark, along with all commentators, I read with a jaded eye when they start talking about this is what this means. But anyway, verse 25, I will break the Assyrians upon my mountains, to crush the Assyrian on my mountains. The Assyrians and Babylon are the same people, and it cites Herod 199, 200. Babylon is reckoned the principal city in Assyria. Strabo says the same thing. The circumstance of this judgment being to be executed on God's mountain is of importance. It may mean the destruction of Sennacherib's army near Jerusalem, and have a still further view comparing it, and he gets into Ezekiel. So just to kind of give you a little bit in terms of this, breaking Assyria, my land. Uzziah had subdued the Philistines, But under the very weak reign of Ahaz, they invaded Judea and took cities in the southern part. And we can go to 2 Chronicles, if you'll take a minute and go there. 2 Chronicles chapter 26. Starting with verse 5. He sought God throughout the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of the Lord. And as long as he sought the Lord, God gave him success. Uzziah went out to wage war against the Philistines, and he tore down the walls of Gath, Jabneh, and Ashdod. Then he built cities near Ashdod and among the Philistines. God helped him against the Philistines, against the Arabs living in Gerbal, and against the Meunites. All of this happens, why? What sets all of this up? Go back to Joshua. What sets all of this up? Should the Philistines even have been on the earth at this point? What did God command Joshua that Joshua commanded the Jews, the Israelites? To wipe them out. And did they? No. And so they come back again to haunt them 700-800 years later. So all of this could have been avoided if they had simply done what God told them to do. Just that simple. Okay, the last part of this chapter takes another spin. It tells Israel not to rejoice in the death of Ahaz, because he will be replaced by Hezekiah. The King James, I know David usually has it, and he's not here. Does anybody else have the King James? In verse 29, what's the language that's used there? Chapter 14. Really? That's King James? Okay. Well, you took all my thunder away. The King James uses the word cockatrice. And as near as I could tell, that's the only version that uses cockatrice. Every other version uses snake or viper. So if you come across that in a King James or if in a study, if someone brings that up, that's the difference. And like I said, as near as I could tell, that's the only version that I found it in. Okay, the direct application to this is what nation? Okay, probably got to kind of shake the cobwebs from last week. This chapter deals with what nation? A prophecy of the rise of a nation 100 years later. Who remembers? Now, it's after Syria, actually. It's a nation that breaks Assyria. We talked about Babylon. Okay, so this prophecy deals with Babylon directly. Okay, and the principal person that's associated with Babylon is Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so that's the direct application here. And it talks about coming down from the north. Oh, crud. Where is it? Okay, I don't see it right now. The direct prophecy is let's see if I can, got a map here. So the direct prophecy is Babylon coming down this way and coming in and destroying Assyria as it comes down, and then comes down into Judea and Jerusalem and Judah. Okay? But there's an allusion here to this as well. And if we look at this, take a step back. What allusion is brought here? Past Babylon. Its fruit will be a flying serpent. Those who are most helpless. This is the part, starting in verse 30. And those who are most helpless will eat, and the needy will lie down in security. I will destroy your root with famine. Okay, so what's an allusion that comes to mind here? Remember, Isaiah deals in the now with his prophecies, and he deals in the prophecy of whom? Of Christ. Okay, so the allusion here would be to what nation? Be to Rome, wouldn't it? There's an allusion there. Okay, I'm not saying there's no direct thing, but you can see this in here. And the fact of the matter is that Rome would have also come this way and come down the north and taken the same path that Babylon did in breaking the Assyrians. When you look at those that are most helpless will eat and the needy will lie down in security, what did Rome provide? They even had a formal name for it. Pax Romana. What did it mean? Well, yeah. And, of course, they took a little more political spin on it. Literally, it meant Roman peace, okay? And they brought that peace by stomping out unrest. They enforced peace, okay? So it was, the benefits, though, to that was that it was easier for people to go find food. They weren't beat up. As long as they followed Roman law and didn't cause any trouble, they were left alone to go do what they needed to do. So that's an allusion that I see in here from this. That the Lord has founded Zion. Okay, we talked about Zion before. Generally speaking, what does Zion represent? Or what and how is Zion represented? Okay, Zion was what? Jacqueline? A mountain. Okay, and the concept that the Jews transferred to this was that this was their focal point, Mount Zion. We see the Jewish nation being referred to as Zion. We see the remnant being referred to as going to Zion, as being that representation that the entire world could see. So that's where you see all these things in here. And yes, it does tend to take a twist and not fit perfectly in with the rest of the prophecy about Babylon. Okay. Any comments? Because we're going to take another whole turn. Weeks ago, we talked about that Isaiah, you've got to be careful with Isaiah. Isaiah is like a soap opera. And what I mean by that is that Isaiah does not work in a linear fashion. Isaiah piles themes on top of each other. So you have to pay attention as to where he is and what prophecy he's dealing with and the time frames that he's addressing. So Babylon was almost 100 years down the road. Now he comes back. Now we see chronologically 13, 14. Now we're going to go to chapter 15 and 16, and he's going to talk about the Moabites. So he's coming back this way. Why it's structured that way, I have no idea. Because God decided that's the way it should be structured. Okay? I don't have a better answer than that. First off, who was the Moabites? Who remembers who the Moabites are? I'm sorry. Yes. Um, The not so white-collar, straight-up descendants of Lot. So actually, the origin of these people is found in Genesis 19. After Lot and his two daughters escaped the divine destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, they eventually took refuge in some nearby mountains. Now, this was eventually because they first went to Zoar. Because if you remember, Lot argued that we don't have time to get to the mountains, which is what the angel instructed them to go, where the angels instructed them to go. So they went to Zoar. Zoar was not destroyed. And later on, Zoar is not listed as a Moabite city. But now I'll go backwards. Lot and his two daughters escaped the divine destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. His daughters were, one commentator said they were engaged. Whether they were, and engaged in that culture was different than it is in our culture. They were essentially married. Why didn't the sons-in-laws, as they're described of Lot, leave Sodom and Gomorrah? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Yes. Whether that was the real reason or not, that's not the reason it's recorded. They didn't believe the destruction was coming, and so they laughed at Lot and the daughters. In fact, if you go back and read the account, the angel physically grabs them, as the way it's described, and drags them out of Sodom and Gomorrah, leaving these two men behind. So that's how Lot's daughters end up without husbands. Now, how did Lot end up without a wife? Turn around and turn to a pillar of salt. Hey, it could have been kosher salt. Yeah. Yep. So anyway, after Lot and his two daughters escaped the divine destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, they took refuge in some mountains. Discouraged by the recent destruction, which consumed both their fiancés, coupled with the isolation of the caves, the oldest daughter convinced the youngest daughter to join in her incestuous relationship with their father to perpetuate the family lineage. Both daughters conceived sons by their fathers, getting him drunk. The son of the youngest daughter was named Ammon, the father of the Ammonites. The son of the oldest daughter was named Moab, the father of the Moabites. These two half-brothers would become powerful nations. Okay, and the Moabites and the Ammonites occupied surrounding land on the eastern border of Israel, east of the Dead Sea. I don't see it right here. Dead Sea. So east of, I handed these out. Hopefully y'all kept them. Here's the Dead Sea. So they would have been east of them in this area in here. Okay. So the land of Moab was sandwiched between two other nations, Ammon to the north and Edom to the south. And Edom was dealt with some of Wade's lessons when he was dealing with the minor prophets. And Edom was a descendant of Jacob's brother Esau. That's the parallel. So, okay. So the most probable timing of this prophecy would have been in the first year of the reign of Hezekiah, and accomplished in his fourth year when Shalmaneser invaded the kingdom of Israel. So that's a little background before we actually get into reading it. He probably would have marched against Moab and essentially secured everything behind him, taking principal strongholds. So, as Sennacherib came down through there. Jeremiah, who lived in this time of this fulfillment, and actually after, recounts Isaiah's prophecies. Let's go to Jeremiah 48. If you have this too, this timeline, just to give you an idea. Okay, so Isaiah's here between about 775 AD and about 690, BC, and about 690 BC. Jeremiah was somewhere between about 650 BC and 575 BC. Those are rough numbers, but that gives you an idea of where Jeremiah was with relation to Isaiah. They were not contemporaries. Okay. So what Jeremiah has would have been passed down verbally from generation to generation. And yet, through God's providence, we're going to see how much of Isaiah's prophecies is recounted by Jeremiah. Now, this is going to be kind of a long read, but I'm going to read the whole chapter. Concerning Moab, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, woe to Nebo, for it has been destroyed. Kiriathaim has been put to shame. It has been captured. The lofty stronghold has been put to shame and shattered. There is praise for Moab no longer. In Heshbon they have devised calamity against her. Come and let us cut her off from being a nation. You too, madmen, will be silenced. The sword will follow after you. The sound of an outcry from Horonaim, devastation and great destruction. Moab is broken. Her little ones have sounded out a cry of distress, for by the ascent of Luith they will ascend with continual weeping, for the descendant of Horonaim. They have heard the anguished cry of destruction. Flee, save your lives, that you may be like a juniper in the wilderness. For because of your trust in your own achievements and treasures, even you yourself will be captured, and Shemosh will go off into exile, together with his priests and his princes, and the destroyer will come to every city, so that no city will escape. The valley will also be ruined, and the plateau will be destroyed. And the Lord has said, give wings to Moab, for she will flee away, and her cities will become a desolation, without inhabitants in them. Cursed be the one who does the Lord's work negligently. You should probably underline that one. And cursed be the one who restrains his sword from blood. Moab has been at ease since his youth. He has also been undisturbed on his lees. Neither has he been emptied from vessel to vessel, nor has he gone into exile. Therefore he retains his flavor, and his aroma has not changed. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I shall send to him those who tip vessels, and they will tip him over, and they will empty his vessels and shatter his jars. And Moab will be ashamed of Shemosh, as the house of Israel was ashamed of Bethel, their confidence. How can you say we are mighty warriors, and men valiant for battle? Moab has been destroyed, and men have gone up to his cities. His choicest young men have also gone down to the slaughter, declares the King, whose name is the Lord of hosts. The disaster of Moab will soon come, and his calamity has swiftly hastened. Mourn for him, all you who live around him, even all of you who know his name. Say, how has the mighty scepter been broken, a staff of splendor? Come down from your glory and sit on the parched ground, O daughter dwelling in Dibon, for the destroyer of Moab has come up against you. He has ruined your strongholds. Stand by the road and keep watch, O inhabitant of Aurora. Ask him who flees and her who escapes, and say, what has happened? Moab has been put to shame, for it has been shattered. Wail and cry out, declare the Arnon, that Moab has been destroyed. Judgment has also come upon the plain, upon Holon, Jazza, and against Mephath, against Dibon, Nebo, against Kiriathaim, Beth Gamul, and Bethion, against Kerioth, Basra, and all the cities of the land of Moab far and near. The horn of Moab has been cut off. Okay, I think we can stop there. Put your finger there, though, and then let's go back to Isaiah. Okay, that's Jeremiah proclaiming in the time that this finds its, if I remember right, that's the time that this finds itself unraveling. Okay, so now let's go back to Isaiah's prophecy, keeping in mind what Jeremiah has already declared, and some of the commentators said joyously. So, chapter 15, the oracle concerning Moab. Surely in the night Ar of Moab is devastated and ruined. Surely in the night Kir of Moab is devastated and ruined. You saw those cities in Jeremiah's proclamation. They have gone up to the temple and to Dibon, even to the high places to weep. Moab wails over Nebo and Medeba. Everyone's head is bald and every beard is cut off. In their streets they have girded themselves with sackcloth, on their housetops and in their squares. Everyone is wailing, dissolved in tears. Heshbon and Eliah also cry out. Their voice is heard all the way to Jahaz. Therefore the armed men of Moab cry aloud. His soul trembles within him. My heart cries out for Moab. His fugitives are as far as Zoar and yes. For they go to the ascent of Luhith, weeping. Surely on the road to Horonaim they raise a cry of distress over their ruin. For the waters of Nimrin are desolate. Surely the grass is withered and tender grass dried out. There is no green thing. Therefore the abundance which they have acquired and stored up, they carry off for the brook of Arabim. For the cry of distress has gone around the territory of Moab. Its wail goes as far as Eglam, and its wailing even to Beer Helam. For the waters of Demon are full of blood. Surely I will bring added woes upon Demon, or Diamond, depending on how you pronounce it. A lion upon the fugitives of Mo and upon the remnant of the land. Okay, you see the direct similarities between Isaiah and Jeremiah. Okay, so you have Isaiah prophesying, and you have Jeremiah proclaiming. If Isaiah's prophecies had not come true and were not accurate, Jeremiah would not be proclaiming the exact same things. So if you want proof that Isaiah's prophecy came true, it's found there in the accounts of Jeremiah. If you look through there, you'll find the same cities, the same references, the same color used. So just kind of a support of what we're talking about here. And Jeremiah would have been speaking to contemporaries of the occurrences and those things that happened. Okay? All right. We could blast through 15 and 16 because they all belong to Moab, but we would miss so very much. So you have to pardon me because we're going to get back digging deep into it again. Okay. Beginning with verse 1. And you'll look at this, surely in a night. Okay. This phrase here may not seem like much. If there are a couple of them, and here's where Clark, I think, kind of got offhand. I looked at 33 different translations. Yes, my Google will bring up 33 different translations, and I counted them. All 33 of them use very similar language. In a night, in the night. The implication there is that the destruction of these two cities, Ar and Kir, were done in one night. That's the implication. Yes, that's the same kind of language. Yeah. Clark argued that it was improperly translated off of one small Hebrew letter and should have read like the night, meaning swift, without warning, that kind of thing. From a broad contextual standpoint, you can't necessarily say that that's a wrong thought process, but I don't think that his opinion stands up when you look at 33 other translations that use more definitive language. Is it outside the realm of God to have destroyed two cities with a single army in one night? Not if he wanted it to happen, no. So I tend to lean back towards, in this case, the majority that hold to that. Could Er and Kir have been in different nights, but still done in a single night? I don't think the context would argue that. So you may come across people that want to poke at things like this, and we've talked about this in this class and in other classes too, that want to poke about this for discrepancies. There's no discrepancy. Okay. This is a prophecy. So, yeah, I think we'll go past that. Okay, verse 2. This one's interesting. because the commentators are split. And again, these are technical things. The prophecy doesn't change any, the results don't change any, the power of God doesn't change any. It's just, this is getting back into those weeds. They have gone to the temple and to Dibon, even to the high places to weep. Moab wails over Nebo and Medeba. Everyone's head is bald and everyone's beard is cut off. Okay, about half the translations say that, and mine does not, that there are two different places listed here. Who has two cities in their translation? Mine does not. Can you read that for me? That part of the verse anyway? Yeah, I don't think so. Probably, no, that's the right verse, but, okay. And it may only be again in the King James. No, Bajith, that's in verse 1, and those are and Kir are two different cities. And again, when I do my study preparation, I have a King James, I have a New Jerusalem, and then I have Google to pull up contrasting versions. But the King James uses language that would imply that they're two cities. And about half the translations call out two different places. The other half agree that Bajith and Dibon are actually the same place. And the translation is better read. So if you have some of the newer translations, it probably does combine them into one city. If you have one of the older translations, you may see two cities implied. So. Yes. Okay, so it is a King James. And like I said, there are other older versions that you may see the same thing in. And then the other half agree with Clark that this is actually one city from the original, and that the translation is better read, he has gone to the house, to their chief temple, where they practiced idolatry. That's really the point of what's getting across here, is that he's saying the Moabites go to their places, their houses of idolatry, to pray, to wail to whatever entities that they wail to. And that was on my list, is that, yeah, that Dibon had a shrine temple that also, where they also went to worship. And so, yeah, that would be along the lines with the half of the commentators that believe that it's all one city. Yeah, Dibon was the name of a tower. And should be better read Beth Dibon. But to go to that point, there's all kinds of disagreements over all of that. Again, it's technicalities. It doesn't change the prophecy. It doesn't change God's message. And it certainly doesn't change the proclamation of destruction that God put forth to the Moabites because of their idolatry. What I did find interesting, again, 33 versions, I get to see all kinds of obscure ones. The Aramaic Bible in plain English reads, "They came up to the house of Ribbon on the high places to weep for Nebu and for Medeba. Moab howls and baldness is on all its heads and every beard is shaved." Okay, that's the Aramaic. So you can see it falls in line with probably most of your translations. We talked about this once before, this concept of shaving heads and shaving beards. To the Jews, what was it? It was. Past that, though. It was shameful. Yeah, it was a sign of disgrace. Now, that would go right in line with them going into exile. They were shamed and disgraced that they were conquered and going into exile. They were conquered and going into exile because they didn't do what God told them to do. So again, we have all kinds of object lessons here. For the Moabites, it was similar. It was a custom of mourning to shave their heads. So when it talks in here, they would have been disgraced. They were going into mourning because their powerful nation that they also thought would never fall. Interesting cultural reference and comparison, isn't it? So anyway, their powerful nation that they thought would never fall, that was absorbed in idolatrous ways and refused to worship God, was being destroyed. And so they were mourning and wailing for this. They were taking on all of the physical actions of disgrace. Okay. Okay. Verse 4. We're still in 15. 15 and 16 together deal with the prophecy of the destruction of the Moabites, specifically God's condemnation of them. And so we're not going to get through 15 and 16 at all today, and we'll be darn lucky to get through 15. We're not even going to get through 15, but that's fine. So we're going to be there today and next week as well. So verse 4. And some of this is just things that kind of pop out to me as I go reading through this, and I look at it and go, that's interesting. So in New American Standard, in verse 4, his soul trembles within him, and it's talking about the Moabite soldiers. Their voice is heard all the way to Jahaz, therefore the armed men of Moab cry aloud, his voice trembles within him. In the King James it reads, the armed soldiers of Moab shall cry out, his life shall be grievous unto him. The New Jerusalem Bible is interesting. It reads, that is why the warriors of Moab are shivering. What's that picture? These are not, I want to make sure that I don't imply any disparagement to any person that chooses to protect this country. But these are not weekend, part-time, I want the benefits, put on a uniform, play around soldier. In this culture, in this time frame, these were warriors. They did not hesitate to draw their sword first, take your head off, and then figure out if they should have done that afterwards. They did not have weak stomachs. They weren't concerned about blood. They weren't concerned about gore. They were warriors. They were men that fought up close. They used, for the most part, short knives like something along this lines, and it was hand-to-hand combat. And they're shivering. They're fearful. Now, picture that. That's the destruction that was happening to Moab. Yeah. And to me, that was probably one of the weakest translations of what's trying to be conveyed there. Yeah, I saw that and I thought, that's interesting that they would use a word like faint in that structure, sentence structure, with this picture that's being painted. The courage is gone, yeah. And even that, to me, does not do justice. Yeah. I was going to use a comparison I probably shouldn't use, so I won't go. By contrast, and this has really nothing to do with this chapter, but just a picture by contrast. If you go to the first century and the Christians that were dealt with by Nero, how did many of them suffer death? Well, we need lots of history lessons, don't we? Yeah, they weren't just lit on fire. They were turned into candles, into torches. They were impaled and then lit on fire. Now, I'm sure they were fearful of that, and I don't have any question about that, but the picture that's painted of these saints is not one of fear, is it? The picture that we get painted in the first century of the Christians, they did not go to their death in fear. These men who fought and died every day were scared to death. What's the difference? Yeah. Okay, and I think that's a great lesson for us as well to end on, especially, which is why I didn't mind going off on this, because we don't have time to really chase anything else. So, any last comments? I'm sorry? She said they had hope. They went to their death in Christ. Jim, since you're back for the first time in weeks and weeks, would you close?
Heavenly Father, we praise your holy name. We praise you for being the God of creation and the God that allows us to be saved. Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to dive into your word. Help us to take it into our hearts, to understand it. Lord, protect us as we go forward with our worship service and help us to be the people that reach out to others and share who you are. Trust and pray.
Thank you all.